So,
Kim,
David, are you still there?
I am still there, and I enjoyed your little warm-up routine.
Thank you. I hope it was sufficiently revealing for the people in India. They felt I was holding too much back the last time. So this time I've really, confessed the truth. So I wonder if maybe Anson might like to ask you the first question, since he's been the only one brave enough to join your group. So would you like to come down and ask David a question? It doesn't have to be anything terribly bright. I mean, it can be related to really any of the subjects here about gender and leadership, about abolition of suffering, any of the various things, and about genetic engineering. So any of those subjects.
Cool. Hi, David.
Hi.
Hello. Greetings. I was wondering, Dr. Solis has talked a lot about your views on gender issues, how you feel that if women had ruled the world, there wouldn't be any wars. I sort of question that a bit, though, because there are women in history, such as like Cleopatra, Margaret Thatcher, a lot of women in power, and they still get involved in wars. I was just wondering, like, what is your view on history? Because we all know women still have this tendency for aggression. Like, some people in prison, like murderers can be women. They don't necessarily have to be men all the time. So I was wondering what your take on this is.
First, I should say that I don't actively campaign for women-only governance, because I don't regard it as politically or sociologically credible. Nonetheless, if we are serious, I must apologize, I'm going to try and switch something off to try to reduce the interference I'm getting. You must bear with me a second. Let's see if this works. Testing. No. As far as we know, there has not been a single case in history of women banding together to wage territorial wars of aggression. It is something that, for instance, chimpanzees do. It isn't something, male chimpanzees, it's not something that women do, whether they are female chimpanzees or female primates. Yes, you're absolutely right. There are cases in history of women behaving in a relatively bellicose way, but whether it's Boudica rebelling against the Romans, or Maggie Thatcher fighting the Argentinian junta, if one actually looks at the historical record, and I said this is quite exceptional, Boudica only rose against the Romans after her daughters were raped and she was flogged. Maggie Thatcher only responded defensively after the Argentinian junta invaded the Falkland stroke Malvinas. Women just statistically have a very, very different cast of mind and cognitive style from men. And sure, this is a statistical generalization, but just as, for instance, we have drink-drive laws, sure, there are plenty of people who will actually be safer driving over the limit than others who drive under the limit. But nonetheless, it is statistically a very significant risk if you are over the limit driving. And a very crude but probably effective way of minimizing global catastrophic and existential risk this century would be taking a strategic decision to elect all-female governments. It is extraordinarily hard to imagine, for instance, female legislators deciding to authorize the development and deployment, let alone the initiation of, let's say, nuclear weapon systems. Once again, this is statistical. I can't promise this would actually happen. Yes, it said it would be a technical option. At this point, someone will probably say, "Oh, this is nonsense about women being less aggressive. You should meet my ex-wife. And it's not to say women can't be just as nasty, spiteful, or aggressive as men, but it's a very different kind of nastiness and spitefulness. And again, once again, this is for evolutionary reasons. In short.
So let me ask Anson. So you've been a part of this Facebook group now for about one day, maybe 25 hours. It's the first time ever that a student in this course has actually joined one of those groups. I've always said that they're all completely a total waste of time, but it seemed to me like this one perhaps had some saving graces, and with David leading it and so on. What have your thoughts been thus far? And do you think that you might stay, or do you think that you'll be gone?
I'm saying for sure. Well, traditionally, in my point of view, I don't think Facebook groups are a waste of time.
No, not all of them.
I know, but I feel like I like joining a lot of groups with different interests, because the people who usually join these groups have very opinionated, have their own worldviews about certain issues, and I think it's really healthy to just explore. I'm not really an active participant in a lot of the debates, but I really just like seeing what people write, seeing what people post, and it's just a hobby for me, leisure. So I'll definitely be staying in the group.
It's very good to have you. Perhaps I should add that I'm not urging everyone to go and participate in Facebook groups. I think the whole walled garden narrowcasting syndrome is extremely unfortunate. I'm all in favour of data liberation, but it's true, yes, on Facebook there is a hedonistic imperative discussion group. And yes, one of the many topics we have talked about is the role of testosterone and male government and male-dominated government, because clearly the kinds of scenarios we discuss about phasing out involuntary suffering, if we have, let's say, a nuclear holocaust or something like that, it would set the project back immensely, to put it mildly.
So, anything else that you want to add?
No, not this one. I'll come back later.
Okay. So, Ian, would you like to come next? I think of you because of what I said about, friends recommending others for the course, and, how you might feel about whether you're doing, whether things are going as well for you in the course as they were for your friend when she took it and stuff. So anyway, why don't you come here and ask David some things?
Hello, David.
Hi.
I had just one quick question and kind of a follow-up question. From some of my readings, it seems that you feel that we should extend this to animal suffering as well, and the elimination of pain for animals. So I wonder if first maybe you could explain your stance on that and maybe clarify that a bit further.
Yes, I mean, the very category of animal versus human, though it's a useful form of shorthand, I think it's probably worth using the more cumbersome non-human animals, in that ever since Darwin we've known that we are fundamentally the same. And it's probably best, I think, to regard, for example, pigs, cows, sheep and chickens as akin to very small children, with a level of sentience and sapience comparable in the case of a pig to perhaps a 2-year-old pre-linguistic toddler, in the case of a chicken perhaps a 6-month-old child. And yes, there's this awful fact that if we treated a human child in the way we treat pigs or chickens, the perpetrator would be locked up for life. And this question is, what is so special about the human genome that entitles us to treat human and non-human animals in such a very different way.
Okay, so I guess my thought, seemingly throughout this course, I've kind of struggled with the idea of like a self-concept being uniquely human, and maybe that's where this next question hinges on. I'm kind of imagining if, like a very dystopic view, if that was to occur. Basically, like I can only kind of imagine if we were to take away animal suffering as well to the same extent as we do humans. Like in the way that I see it, I'm not sure that they would have the same restraint that we might have in terms of, like, if we eliminated all pain and negative experiences for animals, would they not just kind of run wild doing animalistic behaviors without the repercussions that humans might have in terms of, like, feeling bad? Or I don't know if my question, this isn't even really a question, but if they don't have a self-concept to begin with, would the removal of pain not just cause them to kind of just take over the world?
Recall that I don't, whether for humans or for non-human animals, urge uniform bliss. The point of, for example, recalibrating the hedonic treadmill is precisely to preserve informational sensitivity to good and bad stimuli. And just as I certainly wouldn't call for the liberation of infants and pre-linguistic toddlers, nor do I call for the liberation of non-human animals. Essentially, like infants and pre-linguistic toddlers, non-human animals need caring for and looking after. As regards the self-concept, technical note, we know that a fair number of different non-human animals do exhibit a sense of self, as illustrated by, for example, the mirror test. Not merely obvious examples like elephants and primates, but even, let's say, Western scrub jays, with which yes, can pass the mirror test, show signs of mental time travel, in some ways very sophisticated forms of metacognition and mind reading. But from an ethical perspective, I think this is rather a red herring, and that what really entitles any sentient being to moral consideration is not their level of cognitive sophistication, but their degree of sentience. After all, if, God forbid, you suddenly or find yourself in a state of pain or agony, or panic, for example, as it becomes more intense, you lose the capacity for roll distance or metacognition. States of, for example, blind panic are characterized precisely by this absence of metacognitive capacity or sense of self. Now, it's not as though as the pain or the panic gets worse and one loses this metacognitive capacity, that somehow it becomes less morally urgent. And in general, if you look at our most intense experiences, they're not related to generative syntax or our ability to do differential equations or even our metacognitive sense of self-reflective capacity. They, as electrode studies confirm, seem to have their origins in very primitive, inverted commas, parts of the brain, our core emotions, pleasure and pain. So, yes, although, as it happens, I think pigs, for example, are as sapient as pre-linguistic toddlers, that's not why they matter as much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Catherine. Catherine is active in Amnesty International and stuff, so she probably thinks a lot about the same sorts of things that you think about, I think. Anyway, and she's coming with her laptop, so this looks big time.
I can think about stuff, but not remember it. So, hi, David.
Hi, Catherine.
How are you doing?
Waiting for the next technical disaster, I confess.
Well, I guess my big question is focusing a bit on Ian's. That's why my hand bobbed up. And I'm just going to put this down. It was basically just about how you define suffering. Could you just maybe do a quick overview? Do you equate it with pain? What types of pain in that case would suffering count as?
The precise stage at which pain becomes outright suffering is conventional, which doesn't mean to say that it's arbitrary. Clearly, it would be a misuse of language to describe a pinprick as amounting to suffering. But the fact that these grey areas exist doesn't mean to say that there is an enormous swathe of aversive experience that clearly does amount to suffering. So sorry for not giving a very precise and rigorous response. But,
No, that works.
Yeah.
That works. I think the question I have for you then is, if you're getting rid of suffering completely and using, and this is where I want you to double check that I understood your ideas right, if we remove suffering completely and only use pleasure as a measure of things being good or bad, have we lost the adaptive value of pain? And that kind of goes back to what Ian was saying, animals doing things that they're not supposed to,
It's a very deep question why phenomenal pain or consciousness exists at all. Silicon robots don't appear to need phenomenal consciousness to behave adaptively. It's worth distinguishing between phenomenal pain and nociception. In the jargon of medical science, they are doubly dissociable. It's possible to have one without the other. And clearly, it is not going to be feasible for us simply just crudely to get rid of suffering and pain just like that without replacing it with something else. Two possibilities present themselves. One is offloading everything nasty and unpleasant onto smart prostheses, such that, for example, one withdraws one's hand from the hot stove before one actually touches it, presumably with a manual override to prevent any sense of loss of bodily autonomy. But the other thing to do is simply to replace today's pain and pleasure with gradients of physical well-being. At the risk of being indelicate, to consider two people making love. The process done properly is pleasurable from start to finish. Only some aspects of lovemaking are even more pleasurable than others, and sensitive lovers behave appropriately. So, these two strategies are not mutually inconsistent, but there doesn't actually seem anything that is computationally or functionally indispensable that phenomenal pain plays. We can replace it with a more civilized signaling system.
True. I'm actually going to challenge you on that one, though, because as far as I understand, pain is not only the physiological aspect of, oh my goodness, something's really not fun to do, but it's also the emotional aspect. So you've got not only your body reacting, but I guess your very self. So my question for you, and the questions up to now have been for this, is if you remove pain, are you removing a very fundamental human emotion? And what role do you see that would bring, and how would that be good?
We'll perhaps consider mirror touch synesthesia. Mirror touch synesthesia, recall the mirror touch synesthete, if you hurt yourself, will experience pain likewise, but conversely, you experience bliss, the mirror touch synesthete will do the same. Now, assuming we don't want to become mirror touch synesthetes, nonetheless, developments in technology should allow a kind of naturalized telepathy, so to speak. And I would very much encourage these technical developments, because I regard our incapacity to adequately to take the perspective of other sentient beings, human and non-human, not as some kind of mere kind of personality deficit, but a fundamental form of ignorance. So no, well, in one sense, clearly I do think we should get rid of a whole aspect of what it means to be human, namely experience below hedonic zero. But this needn't turn us into rampant egotists, though it might. We also have the opportunity to become super empathetic. I mean, this is a question about the kind of well-being that you think we should be aspiring to.
All right. So I guess that what you're saying is that basically taking away pain's not necessarily a bad thing, that you don't really see any harm to human interactions if we don't have something that brings us together. Because I think that's what pain does, you know? When you have pain, you reach out. You reach for social support. And if you only have pleasure, doesn't that kind of take away your reason for having social connection?
If we were to have states of uniform bliss, then yes, it would undermine the basis of social relationships and make a mockery of them. But if we aspire to life based on information-sensitive gradients of bliss, then one can lead just as full a social life as now. Radical hedonic recalibration doesn't call upon you to radically revise your existing values or preference architecture unless your values are directly tied into the perpetuation or creation of involuntary suffering.
That got a bit more philosophical than I really know, but I think you've done a good job answering my questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Anson is coming back.
Hello again. Hello. Yeah, I'm just wondering what you'd imagine society with post-humans would be in the future.
Ooh, good heavens. Clearly, this is what we've touched on already. I think life will be based on information-sensitive gradients of bliss. I think we will phase out aging, which has been a source of immense suffering throughout history. Yes, I think post-humans will be super intelligent, but that doesn't mean very much. We don't remotely understand or agree today as to the meaning of the term intelligence, and simply sticking the word super in front of it isn't especially illuminating. But for what it's worth, yes, I think post-humans will be super intelligent. One thing that isn't perhaps discussed as much as it ought to be in the futurist literature is the nature of post-human consciousness, in that I think there are enormous state spaces of consciousness that have not yet been recruited for any information signaling purpose at all by natural selection, and one can temporarily at least access some of these state spaces by means of psychedelic drugs. Now, I hasten to add that I don't urge this form of exploration until our reward circuitry is sorted out. But once we are in a position to guarantee invincible well-being, then I think we will be able to explore these radically altered state spaces of consciousness. And in many cases, they are as different as is, let's say, waking consciousness from dreaming. And so I think post-human life will not just be inherently blissful and blissful orders of magnitude in a form that's orders of magnitude richer than anything accessible today. It will take forms of consciousness that are literally inconceivable to us, in the same way that visual experience is inconceivable to a blind person. In fact, the form of inconceivability, I suspect, is even greater, because a blind person is at least born into a culture of visually sighted people and has a range of his conceptual scheme is geared towards visual visual concepts. Whereas in the case of radically altered state spaces of consciousness as opened up by some psychedelics, one hasn't even got the conceptual equipment to grapple with the kinds of experiences opened up. So anyway, that's a rather long and roundabout way of saying that I think the future will be inconceivable.
How do you imagine like people will connect to each other as post-humans? It seems like if you eliminate pain, pain is one of the things that really could bring people together. I mean, if you empathize with people's suffering, I don't really see how you would empathize with people's lack of pleasure. But I was wondering, like, how you think society will sort of interact in the future.
Is it really I mean, it's certainly true that if someone wins the lottery today, a minority of people will empathize and think how wonderful, but a lot of people will feel sour and resentful and jealous and all kinds of things like that. But I don't think there is anything intrinsic to the nature of pleasure that means that other people are incapable of sharing in the joy. Moreover, I think there's a much more intimate sense in future, in which I touched on before, the nature of naturalized telepathy. Traditionally, philosophers have wrestled with, the skeptical problems of other minds. How can I know that you're not simply a zombie, for example? But in future, for example, it should be possible to engage in a kind of reversible mind melding, kind of the equivalent of a corpus callosum and so on. And if I can appreciate and savor your pleasures as if they were my own, this kind of very, very egocentric conception of the world we have today will, I trust, be transcended. It's a legacy of the African savannah. It's an illusion. It's a very genetically adaptive illusion, but nonetheless, my sense that I'm the center of the universe and other people are bit players on it, fundamentally it is an illusion and a form of ignorance. And at least in principle, at any rate, technology will enable us to transcend it.
And I have a little quick question about your concept of a gradient of pleasure. Like, wouldn't that scale just be just taking our current scale and shifting it up? I mean, if we imagine now, like, pain would be negative and pleasure would be positive. Like, are we not just moving the scale up? Like, if we're feeling lack of pleasure, wouldn't it feel the same as pain and suffering in some sense?
Intuitively, one might imagine so, but recall that there are sadly people who endure chronic depression or chronic pain, and even if some of their days are less terrible than others, it's still chronically painful. To use a much happier example, back again to two people making love. Surely the process can be pleasurable from start to finish, even though some aspects of lovemaking are even more pleasurable than others. Apologies for these rather earthy examples. They just make my point more vividly, perhaps, than more cerebral pleasures. I mean, here's a more cerebral example. I can enjoy playing chess against my computer, and even though it doesn't gladden my heart, so to speak, if I discover that there's a threat to my king, nonetheless, the whole process can be enjoyable throughout. So, yes, life can be based on information-sensitive gradients of bliss, just as it can be based on information-sensitive gradients of misery. The difference being, of course, that one's quality of life, other things being equal, is immeasurably higher if one's hedonic set point is high too.
But surely there must be some sensitization in that sense, right? If you're happy, like I could see still depression in that scale. If you're on the low end of the happiness gradient, and you've been on that for a while, you might. To me, it feels like there's some sense of suffering there. So like you're still on the low end of the scale, right?
Well,
like, you bring the pleasure. You bring up the point of making love, right? And some points are higher than the others, but perhaps like the two individuals are sensitized to the low points, right? And that feels like nothing to them. That feels like they're not getting any pleasure. Like, would that bring them suffering, like as a couple?
Well, as a celibate philosopher probably isn't the best person to pronounce on this, but perhaps I don't know, more sensually inclined folk could comment here, because I think the consensus seems to be that lovemaking, as I said, is pleasurable throughout. That sure, you could claim that the hedonic dips, so to speak, are functionally, informationally analogous to pain or suffering, but to claim in some sense that they really amount to suffering, I think would be mistaken. I mean, if I mean, in theory, if this contrast effect, one can imagine in future kind of false memories or anything like that. But I just don't see this is going to be necessary to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think most of you would probably like a chance up here. Yeah.
Hi, David.
Hi.
So I have some questions here that are more concerned about the consequences of actually having success in the transhuman ideal. So my biggest one is the question about if we actually succeed in this super longevity idea, what are the consequences that it'll have on some of our more man-made creations? And by that, I mean things like if you believe that religion is a man-made thing, there's so many religions out there that are have deep-seated beliefs in what goes on in the afterlife. So if we effectively eliminate dying, there are so many religions around the world that will lose this vital point in its central belief. Have you ever thought about the consequences of like these sort of things if we actually achieve super longevity?
Yes, in practice, though, though one can sometimes speak of immortality, there is a difference between super longevity and immortality. I mean, ultimately, there is presumably the heat death of the universe to contemplate, or when the last supermassive black holes evaporate. It's not as though that we can become literally immortal. I suppose that could be questioned by some people, but the consensus would be one couldn't. In terms of religion, I suspect in the long run today's religions will collapse under the weight of their own logical contradictions, but that isn't to say necessarily that spirituality will dissipate. On the contrary, it's quite possible as we actually unravel the molecular basis and signature of spiritual experience, it will be feasible massively to amplify it. I mean, an era of hyper-spirituality. The honest answer is, I don't know.
So another question I have then on that is, I guess this one doesn't deal with immortality. This one deals more just with the complete removal of pain. Now, like, the only really big example I can draw on for this is in terms of so many sports throughout the world, lots of times it's an act of a war of attrition. So if you think of a marathon, truly at the end, first, second, and third, they're all probably very equal in their level of fitness. It's just who at the last leg of the race can fight through that immense physical pain, So if we eliminate this sort of pain, will we essentially also eliminate these massive unifying competitions that we have throughout the world? Like, will things like the Olympics no longer exist because everyone can compete on a level where they don't feel pain anymore?
You say unifying, and of course, in one sense, it can be true. I mean, if one is rooting for my team, but of course, sport can be incredibly divisive. And in the case of, let's say, a race, a competition, a competitive sport, if you look at the abject despair experienced by the loser, for example, it tends to be very much a zero-sum game. I mean, our competitive sports are a legacy of the African savannah, our past, particularly males as hunter warriors. And really, I would say that we want to move to a society in which people's sense of fulfillment doesn't depend essentially on doing down others, because even if it's done with some kind of civilized veneer, there is something profoundly uncivilized about causing suffering by beating, crushing, triumphing over one's fellow subject of experience. One can have an unlimited abundance of goods and services. What one can't have is an unlimited abundance of winners or status goods.
All right, thanks, David.
Thank you.
Hello, David.
Hi.
So this is a question about longevity, right? How would a transhuman or like posthuman try to tackle if you're not able to die? How would you able to tackle the problem of world population? Since like if there's too much people in the world, the resources we have in the world are not enough to keep us alive, or the waste would kill us too. Like our waste would be too much for us. So how would a transhuman try to fix the problem of world population?
Yes, very important question. Most transhumanists would very strongly, very libertarian, would support procreative freedom. Yet it's difficult to see how procreative freedom could be consistent with everyone or almost everyone leading indefinite lifespans. Worse, one can be sure that if technologies for radical super longevity are feasible, people will want them for their pets as well, animal companions too. So yes, in practice, I think it will lead to a reproductive revolution and the loss of procreative freedom as we understand it today, with all the potential ethical dilemmas it involves. Just one point to make here, though, is that in future it will be possible reliably to control, to modulate the extent to which one wants to have children. I mean, at the moment, many people, for evolutionary reasons, have an extraordinarily powerful desire to have children. But if it is possible to switch that on or off, as I think it will be, it's certainly going to be easier than it is to actually phase out the biology of aging, then it won't necessarily mean that you have large numbers of desperately frustrated people living quasi-immortal lives and yet not able to have children.
Okay. Also, just like turning back, like making not able to age, right? Wouldn't we still be able to be not immune to other diseases, such as like there's still no cure for common cold, they're still dying off the flu. So how would we try to prevent that instead of should we try to prevent that first instead of like aging problem? Since like if we try to tackle the disease of aging first, we're still prone to other diseases.
Yes, I think as we head towards an era of rapid genome sequencing and genetic engineering, it's going to be possible to tackle all manner of diseases from the mild to the crippling and disabling. In terms of the relative difficulty level of, for example, tackling the common cold versus tackling aging, I would say tackling aging is an order of magnitude more different. But as I say, this is an intuition rather than any kind of rigorous or widely accepted consensus view.
And by that, if we try to remove pain, wouldn't that mean we remove the intuition to remove the diseases that will, like, if it happens, like, since humans are like prone to mutations as well, wouldn't that remove the intuition to remove like the diseases? Like, let's say we became post-humans and then we're able to like reverse aging and stuff, and we were able to remove pain, but then a new thing comes out and like basically tries to wipe the human race, even though we're invincible. Wouldn't that kind of remove the intuition, since like pain can drive us to curiosity, which creates like the progress we have now?
Once again, this is a very powerful intuition, but nonetheless recall that if we're talking about recalibrating the hedonic treadmill, one can be even more motivated to do things if one is enjoying gradients of bliss. Who today are the most motivated people? They're not depressives who suffer from learned helplessness and behavioral despair. It is the people who love life most. So the slightest decrement of well-being can be tremendously motivating if you already love life. Recall that in future, there's this, even though crudely speaking, the mesolimbic dopamine system that mediates motivation and drive, and the new opioidergic system in our twin hedonic hotspots, which mediates pure bliss, even though they're intimately connected, ultimately they're orthogonal, and we can choose arbitrarily to amplify one or both to whatever degree we choose. And it's quite possible, I stress it's only possible, I don't know, that our successors and possibly our descendants will not merely be vastly happier than we are, but also hyper-motivated, finding life extraordinarily significant and meaningful to an extent that isn't even physiologically possible today. So in terms of confronting threats, I don't think it's a coincidence that the person I know, for instance, who has the highest hedonic set point without being clinically manic, is also engaged in studying the field of existential risk.
Okay. And one last question is, like, who would control the power of like genetic engineering? Like, if this was made commercially, would any other forces try to stop it, like the government, or like would there be a dichotomy in between the rich and the poor and anything like that?
In terms of the difference between rich and poor, I suspect it's rather like, kind of copies of Microsoft Word. Rich people can enjoy them, but so can the poorest people in the world. Poorest people in the world may have to suffer from the burden of having unlicensed software, but nonetheless it's functionally identical. And in any case, in the case of the cost of genome sequencing, it is coming down so rapidly that there is no reason why extremely poor people can't enjoy access, and likewise to the sophisticated gene editing and authoring, user-friendly authoring tools that are going to become available too. So I don't think the rich-poor divide there is going to be relevant. In terms of who actually controls the technology, clearly there's going to need to be sorry about that, crash. Clearly there is going to need to be a regulatory revolution too. If one's sympathies are libertarian and anti-statist, as mine are, then one hopes that control will be in the hands of individual citizens and prospective parents. But one can be sure that other actors, state actors, will be very keen to regulate the technology too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, David. I'm back.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, from Eric's last question, I was just curious. As post-humans, like, do we even have a concept of rich and poor? I mean, the concept of competitive, like one tier is higher than the other. I think that sort of stems from our ancestors from the savannah. So I was wondering, like, if you think there's actually even the concept of rich and poor in the future.
A good question. One doesn't like to sound utopian, but as more and more technologies are digitized, yes, the very notion of what it means to be rich and poor tends to evaporate. Just as, in principle, everyone can enjoy access to all the world's genomes, all the world's software, all the world's films, music, the kinds of goods and services that there can't, by their very nature, be an unlimited abundance of, are positional goods and status goods. But what precisely are those goods going to be? Sure, there are a finite number of old masters, for instance, and so yes, in one sense, that only a handful of rich people can own old masters. But if you can own a work of art that is indistinguishable in every respect from an old master, apart from its causal ancestry, the whole question becomes moot. Once again, there's a danger of sounding utopian here, but yes, the meaning of rich and poor as we understand them today is going to be transformed in future.
Just one quick fun question. In terms of longevity, and stopping aging, what do you think is the ideal age for stopping that? I mean, as a child, as a late adult, or elderly? What do you think?
Well, in terms of bodily appearance, I suppose I would prefer to stop at about 18 and morphological freedom to make myself look like a Greek god or something like that. I suspect most people would prefer to be a little older. One thing I can perhaps just add here is that I think there can be almost something cruel about talking about radical anti-aging technologies to an older audience that isn't going to be around probably to benefit from these technologies. I mean, telling someone that science is going to find a cure for aging perhaps around 10 years after you're dead, it undermines people's rationalizations and it doesn't make them any happier. So what I really think is we need a combination, a twin-track approach of kind of Aubrey de Grey's Ending Aging, this kind of fundamental research, together with opt-out cryonics, which ensures that everyone who wants to has the opportunity to have themselves cryonically suspended, ideally prior to their death rather than after their nominal brain death, to ensure a high likelihood of being reanimated.
Hey David, how's it going?
Hi.
I hope I'm really not digging myself a hole here, but I actually Wikipedia'd you, and it's not very credible, but there was a quote on Wikipedia that says the hedonist imperative outlines how genetic engineering and nanotechnology will abolish suffering in all sentient life. The metabolic pathway of pain evolved only because they served the fitness of our genes. They will be replaced by a different sort of neural architecture. States of sublime well-being are destined to become the genetically pre-programmed norm of mental health. I don't have the best writing in the world, but I was just wondering, how is it possible to replace like the human central nervous system? And if so, if it's possible, like, what about people with drug and alcohol abuse?
I think the quote may have come from the Hedonistic Imperative, which was an online manifesto I wrote back in late 1995. I stress that I don't advocate replacing the central nervous system, or at least not within the foreseeable in the foreseeable future. Recall, this isn't about taking drugs and getting high in today's sense. This is about fundamentally redesigning our reward architecture. And one can look today, and we know that they have a very high degree of genetic loading, at people's different hedonic set points, ranging from people who are essentially depressed most of the time to a lucky handful of hypothymic people whose lives pretty much are good all the time, but of course fluctuate in response to environmental contingencies. And once one identifies the particular genes and variant alleles, one can add extra copies, one can overexpress them, one can enrich our current reward architecture, and essentially the upper bounds to well-being are unclear. But so long as one actually retains this differential, make sure that one can still respond to good and bad stimuli, there is no reason why we can't preserve critical insight, social interaction, intellectual progress. This isn't a plea for us all to get out and get smashed or get stoned.
Okay, thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
I just needed a quick clarification. Your idea of the eradication of pain and suffering, does that include the eradication of diseases and conditions that causes suffering as well, or is it just the genetically enhanced threshold of pain that causes the decrease in suffering?
Oh, I take it as read that medical progress will get rid of infectious disease, together with the various well-known and indeed rarer metabolic genetic disorders. But unfortunately, it's the case that even if we all enjoyed invincible physical health, that infectious disease were banished, genetic diseases were banished, and we lived in an ideal society, some kind of recreated notional Garden of Eden, there would still be all manner of people who experience existential angst, low mood, sense of meaningless and futility, unhappy love, jealousy, as long as we retain our core Darwinian emotions as they exist today. And yes, I think the ethically urgent priority is to phase out the biology of involuntary suffering. But in the long run, I think all of today's states of consciousness, including our best peak experiences, will be regarded as profoundly suboptimal.
Okay. And this is a totally different issue. You are a vegan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm assuming that you're a vegan because you are against the meat industry's not very humane practices. And would 3D printed food be ethically okay for you?
Absolutely. I said my objection is to the suffering and harm that humans inflict on non-human animals. And that, yes, in one sense, I think it's highly likely that technology will solve the problem. But realistically, we're not going to have 3D printing, in vitro meat, widely available and commercialized for perhaps a couple of decades yet. And in the meantime, billions of sentient beings whose sentience is comparable to that of human infants and toddlers will have been horribly abused and killed simply because we like the taste of animal flesh. So, yes, I think our treatment of non-human animals is ethically indefensible.
Okay. And one last thing, also to do with animal suffering. What are your thoughts on animal models of research right now? Because technically, you are inducing a state of suffering on animals, but it's also necessary for research just before they start human trials.
All sorts of experimental procedures don't involve harming or hurting a sentient being in any way. The question is what to do about those procedures which inevitably involve discomfort, pain, or something far worse. And without going into details now, I would simply say I think our rule of thumb should be that we shouldn't make species membership an ethically relevant criterion, except insofar as it bears on level of sentience. In the same way that someone's colour shouldn't bear on the issue of whether or not they enjoy rights not to be harmed, nor should species membership. It should be done impartially. Indeed, other things being equal, human models are far more likely to be reliable than non-human animal models if one is testing a particular drug. The danger of describing oneself as an anti-speciesist, as I do, is people will think that one is somehow wanting to accord equal rights to mosquitoes and humans or pigs, which isn't the case. If there is a severe and irreconcilable conflict between an Anopheles mosquito and a human, or for that matter a pig, the humans clearly come first. The question is that if one has a pig or a dog or a human-free linguistic toddler, should the toddler have moral precedence simply in virtue of belonging to my species?
Thanks.
Hi. What are the ethical issues with using, per se, animal test subjects that have no sense of pain? I mean, this is similar to the discussion on the future, how if we use a robot to do chores and stuff, what are the ethical implications of that? Is that robot feeling suffering, even though it can't feel the pain or suffering?
Once again, one needs to distinguish, that this kind of functional role from the phenomenology. Sorry, could you develop your question a little more? I wasn't sorry. I may not have adequately understood it.
Yeah. So, say hypothetically, we eliminate pain in all our medical test subjects and suffering, so they don't feel the suffering. Like, would there still be some ethical or moral issues with that, with using these test subjects for science?
Without their consent, yes, I think issues of consent are important. I think other things being equal, even if one is a utilitarian, having the principle of the sanctity of life is more likely to lead to a happy outcome than a number of utilitarian policies as commonly conceived. But yes, clearly, if there is, well, I say clearly, if there is no suffering involved, all sorts of procedures that would otherwise be unethical cease to be so.
But if there's no suffering, there's still the risk of doing physical harm. Like, there
Yes.
has to be some ethical issues with that.
Yes, I agree. Once again, I would just say that per se, species membership should not be the relevant criterion in deciding here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have 2 minutes left. I would like to thank you very much. I think this has been a very successful session, and I look forward to your taking part next term. We're having a Future Day party this Saturday, so we'll be thinking of you then also. And what are your thoughts? Are there any ways in which, from your point of view, we could improve these teaching sessions, make them better? Is there any change that you would like to suggest in how we do this? Or are you satisfied?
I think it's been very satisfactory. I probably could do with some tech support here. I've been plagued by echoes and an iPad that keeps on falling over and managing to mute it and stuff like that. But this is something I really ought to pay attention to. Just a quick word to your students. If anyone really wanted to ask some questions but didn't feel like appearing on camera, I can be contacted via email and Facebook and would be delighted to explore them. I know not everyone feels like coming up on stage.
Yes. No, I appreciate that very, very much. And it's a very nice thing for the students that you enjoy the interaction. I think they've been doing quite well. They've just done their first papers, and all those papers look good. So I think it's a good group that we have this term. So I would like to thank you very, very much, and we look
Thank you, Kim.
forward to more of this in future terms. So bye-bye for now, and have a very good evening there.
Thank you.
All right.